Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-filled gush for The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. As I said, this video will have spoilers in it, so if you've not read this book, go ahead and check out my spoiler-free review, which will be linked on the screen. So I don't have any real rhyme or reason in talking about this book, because there's so much that obviously happened in this that I'm just gonna kind of skip around. I took some notes, but overall it's just gonna be me being like, it's so good, it's so amazing, it wrapped everything up so well. Like, that's just my conclusion to this, like, pretty much after this book ended, and while it was ending, my soul left my body, ascended to another plane, screamed for like 10 minutes, and then came back down and like rested and then stared at a wall for a while. Like, I'm not exaggerating with like when I finished this, I put it down and I like just stared because my brain couldn't process all other information around me, so I just was like, what just happened to me and my emotions? First off, I love how much world building got added even in this book. Obviously in the other books you do get a lot of world building stuff and you learn about like this thing that's controlling everything that's written down and is impacting everything, but you still don't really know how everything fits. You don't understand how all of the like monsters, creatures work. How we still don't know when this book starts how the Inquisitors work, how the like Colossus work, how the Kandra work. Like you know that they're kind of like intertwined, but you don't quite know how. And the fact that this book kind of brings that all together is interesting and mind-blowing. It's still something that I didn't see coming. I didn't know, so the first thing I feel like you learn about is that the Colossus are human, or used to be human. And that I didn't really see coming at all. I was like, maybe they like just take off the skin and the skin forms, or like they like kind of, you know, like you chop off an arm and that turns into a new Colossus, something like that. Like, I just didn't see humans being turned into Colossus. And through hemalurgy, if that's how you pronounce it, again, I'm not sure. Creepy. Like, that whole magic is creepy. And obviously we kind of knew about it a little bit before, but this book is when it really takes off and you kind of discover that there's like three kind of cousins of each other within the magic system, which is cool. Like, we already had just like the Mistborn elementic magic, which is cool. And then you add on the other two and how they're kind of like cousins of each other, and it's all through metal, which like is cool. Like, just how everything is described makes perfect sense to me, and I'm a person who I don't always picture things in my head easily. Like, I'll kind of skim over stuff, and it's not like I always picture stuff as perfect scenes. I picture how the powers work perfectly in my head, which is what makes this so much more enjoyable for me. But just how creepy that particular magic is, and how it's formed so much stuff in the world, is really interesting. Like, how it formed the Colossus, and then also how it formed the Kandra, and then we finally found out how Inquisitors are formed, which is so creepy. Like, they're all creepy, but the Inquisitors are like the creepiest. And since I had kind of a hard time picturing them, honestly, because they're scary, and like I don't like picturing scary things, but I found some fan art right after I finished this book of them, and they're terrifying. They're terrifying. It's so creepy. So speaking of the Kandra, we finally learn that the first generation were the ferrochemists that were with Rashik when he got the Well of Ascension. What? I love the Kandra. The Kandra, and talking about them and getting to know more about them was so interesting to me. I love their culture, and I love everything about them, that they used to be human. Like, the fact that all these creatures used to be human tugs on my heartstrings. And Tensoon as a character is so amazing. Like, I love a lot of the characters in the series. I love Sazed, I love Breeze, I love Kelsier, obviously, even though like he's not technically a character, but he kind of is still. Like, I'll talk about that in a second. So I love Tensoon, and I loved all the chapters, but then we would have like at the very beginning, when you know Tensoon is locked up and something's gonna happen with him, I just kept being like, when are we getting back to Tensoon? I just love him so much, and I loved just everything about their culture and stuff. And the second generation sucks, obviously, but at the end, when they finally say like the resolution, I think is what it's called, is happening, and they all have to like take out their spikes and die so that Ruin cannot control them. They don't die, obviously, they turn back into, you know, like those mist things, but it's basically dying. They're no longer sentient. Stop. Like, I'm still a little upset that even though like we had a lot of loss in this book, which was great, Tensoon's death still didn't even like ring with me, because I was like, are we not gonna get to see like him actually going? Like, he never gets to say goodbye to Vin. stop. Like, I am so upset that he just wanted to get back to Vin, and he wanted to help Vin, and they have like such a good relationship, and like you don't never get to see them like. It hurts me. So his death was obviously devastating, and even just the other ones, like, they just are such a cool species slash race of people, and I loved them, and the fact that like they don't exist anymore. Like, my little babies, I just love them. Which is weird, because when I first heard about them, I was like, they're creepy, they eat people, but they don't kill people, but they like eat their bones and da-da-da, it's so creepy. But like, now I just am so attached to them, and they're gone, and my heart. So now we discover how Ruin's been kind of impacting things the entire time, and how he was Reen, her brother's voice the entire time, how he was Zane's god from book 2, and then how he was Kelsier appearing to spook. So as far as Zane, now it finally comes together. I said in my review of the second book that I felt like Zane wasn't dead because he had a spike in him, and I was like, oh, he's kind of like an Inquisitor. They can't die unless you like really like impale them or like pull the spike out. Like most of the Inquisitors say that you like pull the spike out of their back or whatever. So I thought that that was one of those spikes, and that was keeping him alive, but now I found out that that was the spike that was just like impacting him and making him think he was crazy. And once we kind of figured those out, I knew that was the only twist that I kind of discovered myself. I knew that Vin's earring was going to be a spike that was like controlling her, because that's the only time, like, I remembered that when the earring was out, she could have the mist be around her and stuff like that. So I knew that that was gonna happen. That was the only thing though, and I was like, stop holding on to your stupid earring! But I was a little bit upset about the Kelsier thing. Like, Kelsier is my favorite character in the whole series, pretty much, honestly. Like, I love Sazed. Sazed and him are probably like equal, but Kelsier is a character I just adored, and since he was taken from us so soon, I feel like I'm even more attached to him. So when he appeared to spook, I was like, I just want him to be real. And I was like, there's no way he's real. Like, that's definitely Ruin because of the way that he's talking and the way that he's trying to convince him to do stuff. So that was sad. Sad face. But I do love how Kelsier is such an important character throughout this entire series. Between him and the Lord Ruler, they're both continuing characters in the series, and I love that about it. Like, they're still important, and even though they're gone, they're still important. And I really appreciate, especially with villains, when villains are gone but they still play an important role. So with the Lord Ruler, he's an important thread throughout, and you actually learn that like he wasn't that bad of a guy. Like, he was, obviously, and he changed some things that he shouldn't have, and he came from like a place of hate at the beginning, so he made some really poor decisions, but ultimately like he did a lot of things where he was trying to help people and he just went about it the wrong way. So totally interesting. Like, the fact that we have this evil lord that everyone thinks is like the worst thing ever, you get rid of him, you discover that things could have got a lot worse, and they do get a lot worse, and he was holding back a lot of stuff, and he was trying to help as best he could, even though he was messing up a ton. Super cool, very endearing. Still, like, not, again, a favorite character of mine necessarily, but I love how he was a common thread throughout the books. And Kelsier, as my precious baby who I love so much, is a point in all of the books and is brought up multiple times because he's, like, obviously like a god now. His bones are used over again. And then at the end, when Sazed, like, writes that letter to them and says that he make spook a Mistborn because Kelsier, like, told him to as like a parting gift or whatever. Like, I was already misty. I was like crying a little bit at the end, not gonna lie. And then that happened and I was like, but I love him. I love him so much. I love Kelsier so much, and I gotten really attached to Spook, and I was already like grieving Sazed, and then that happened and I was like, oh my god, like, because it was you actually knowing that like he's kind of like communicating with them like a little bit. It just speaks to me on a lot of levels. Then we finally find out that the mist is part of preservation, which is really cool because I knew that like mist couldn't be part of ruin, but what was it? And it was the deepness, and like it was impacting things, but like what? And we finally figure out that it's part of preservation. It's trying to help the Mistborn. It's trying to help Vin. It had chosen Vin because she's supposed to be like the new preservation, da 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 da, and that it was snapping people, which is so cool that like you finally figure out that they have this whole army of Allomancers that they can just use because the mist had been snapping people because it wasn't actually bad. So cool, so cool. And the number 16, I'm really interested to see what the number 16 has to do with the rest of the books, because I have a feeling that the number 16 has Cosmere implications, because there were some quotes in here that were talking about how like the number 16, it will have an impact on the world and the universe. And I was like, Is that Cosmere stuff? It's Cosmere stuff. It has to be Cosmere stuff. But I haven't looked anything up yet, obviously, because I don't want to be spoiled for anything, because I haven't read any other books yet. Once I get through some more, looking up some Cosmere stuff and seeing if 16 has any kind of implication for anything. So I mentioned this in my review. I loved how religions were such a huge part of the story. I really love fantasy worlds especially, and science fiction, but fantasy especially, when you have religions play such an important part in the culture and how they all come back around and are kind of connected. Religion is such a huge part in like world building and culture for me, because even though if you don't believe in anything, if you don't have religion, it still impacts so many things, whether we like it or not, about culture. So the fact that we have all these religions that Sazed was like documenting, and they play such an important role, and ultimately all of them come together as all of them being kind of true or having truths and help him like rebuild the world, is so cool. And he goes through like 2 pages of him going through like all these religions that have been previously mentioned in the other books that he either preached to people or that people believed before, like characters that we've met or heard about. Makes me really emotional. It's so cool that like his whole purpose had a purpose, and he studied religions his entire life, stored them, and then he could use them when he like became God. And he had a whole thing in here where he was doubting God and doubting like religion, because he was before like kind of a religious person, or he thought that all of the religions had truth, which he was right, and he was doubting everything. He ultimately started having a little bit of faith because he just decided that he was going to, and that's just what you need to do. And then he like becomes God. Like, what? Obviously with all the chapter headers, I thought all of them were from Vin's perspective. Completely thought they're from Vin's perspective. I was like, oh, she's learned a ton now, and like she's, you know, a good writer now and whatever. But like as the thing went on, I was like, this is a male narrative voice. And I was like, maybe this is just Brandon Sanderson really struggling with females, because I do still feel that he doesn't write women very well in this series. I've heard he's gotten a lot better, but he didn't write Vin very well. So I was like, okay, maybe this is just him like not doing well with Vin. And then at the end when I was like, it was Sazed the whole time, like I went back and actually read some stuff, and I was like, ah! And I just love that like he had so many doubts, and he was like the best of them, honestly. And he had so many doubts all the time about like being a rebel or being like a religious person or whatever, or not having faith. And then he's the hero of ages. Stop. Also, I'm emotional about the fact that like he becomes the god, but then he can talk to all of his friends that have died. Like he has Vin and Elend there, they're happy and they're like at peace finally. He talks to Kelsier, like best friend. I just so important. It makes me very emotional. I just love them. And I am really excited actually that towards the end I started to like Vin and Elend. I think Elend arguably has like some of the best character development of both of them. I do like Vin more than I liked her in the first 2 books, but she still had moments where I felt like she was cool. And I think that's just how Brandon Sanderson like wrote her, like not the best. But Elend just came so far, and I didn't like him necessarily, and I still don't like super ship them or anything like that. But I was convinced they were gonna make it. Like I was completely, even though everyone's like, oh my god, it's so tragic, and like, you know, like this doesn't hold back anything, I was like, okay, whatever. I felt like the chapter's being told in her perspective, and that they're both gonna survive. Like that she was gonna bring him back, or that she was at least going to make it, and then they both died. I was like, you just killed the protagonist! Like, the only protagonist of this book that survived was Spook. What? I love it, because the world is ending. Like, the world is freaking ending. Vin takes in all this power to herself, like, helps destroy Ruin, and then Sazed, like, becomes the god. It doesn't hold back anything, because the world is ending. There very obviously should be character deaths. And I'm so happy that there were so many, and there were protagonists. Like, of course the main people, like the Emperor and the Empress, and the people that have all the power, like the main Mistborns, they should die. Like, or something catastrophic should happen to them, obviously. And that doesn't usually happen in most books, or if it does, it doesn't make any sense. This made sense. And it just speaks to me on a lot of levels. I am just so happy about this conclusion and how it wrapped everything up. So happy. My only complaint that I did have with the series, and I think this is something that Brandon Sanderson, from what I've heard, has gotten better at, but I am annoyed that basically every character is paired up with somebody. Like, they're not necessarily all paired up together, thank God, but they all have, like, a relationship, and all the relationships are straight. Like, I've talked about this before. I do not like when fantasy is like everybody is straight and heteronormative, because it's just like not realistic. Like, you have a new world in a completely like different universe. You don't need everyone to be straight. Like, it's not necessary. And of all these characters, you have a huge cast of characters and they're all straight and they're all paired up with somebody, or they were at least. Like, Sazed and Tyndwyl and Breeze and Lorraine, I think her name is, and Spook and the girl there. All of them. Ham is married. Like, they all have somebody. And that's just, like, not necessary, like, at all. And if they're all gonna be paired up, they don't all need to be straight. Or they don't need to be paired up in, like, monogamous relationships. Like, we just don't need to have that happen. And the fact that it happened was, like, really? Like, for example, I always read Breeze as at least bisexual, if not gay. And I'm like, why are you, like, paired up? No, like, it doesn't need to happen. So that's the only thing, but I've heard that he has gotten better about this, and that actually Brandon Sanderson is fairly religious, which I didn't know. And so at the beginning, when he first started writing, he didn't feel that he should include gay characters at all, and he has since improved on that and made a serious effort, which I appreciate when authors actually try and get better and grow as authors. So I can't quite judge that quite yet. I will say that this is a problem within this book and this series, but I'm excited to see more in the future. I'll see if he really is getting better and making strides. You know, if somebody is that religious, although I don't agree with that perception at all, and that sucks, I still appreciate that he is trying to do better. So we'll see how his more recent books are. But that's the only complaint that I have, is like the coupling type thing. I don't really ship anything in these books, with the exception of Sazed and Tyndwyl. Like, I ship them. But that's the only thing. So if you're curious, I obviously am going to be reading more Sanderson stuff and getting more into the Cosmere stuff. I don't plan on reading anything outside of his Cosmere stuff. It's just not really interesting to me. But I am going to read the rest of his series. So currently my thing that I think I'm going to do, so I'm going to read Warbreaker first, because I own that one, and then probably Elantris, and then in there I'm going to read some of the like short stories, novellas type things, and then do either the newest Mistborn books or start Way of Kings Stormlight Archives. I'm not sure what I'm going to start first. I think people recommend reading Stormlight first, but since Stormlight is so big, I'm not sure if I can motivate myself. Like, I am actually getting the UK versions that match these versions, the ones that are split up, which I know some people have a problem with. But I think having two separate books, I'll read them at the same time, like I'll read them back to back, but I think having two separate ones will make me feel a little more motivated than like the giant US editions. It's too much, and I'm not going to read them on Kindle, like I'm not. So excited about that, and that's probably the order I'm going to get everything in. So comment down below and let me know what you thought of the Hero of Ages and the original Mistborn trilogy. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all you guys soon. Bye!